unbelievable. It's been so long since we've been able to do this. God, just breathe it in. And to have this many unbelievable storytellers. I do a lot of these, and these were just, there wasn't a dud in the bunch. They were all so beautiful and moving and funny and humble and smart. So we're going to like decide the winner, and they get a fucking, award or something. But I think we can kind of all agree, like, everybody who told the story was just sensational. And so, therefore, do we have the winner now? The winner will compete in the Grand Slam, but I'm telling you, this was like Grand Slam quality at a budget price. Okay. So the winner for tonight, among the many winners, is Sean Wellington.
Congratulations. Why are you still single? I'm trying to think of all the women I know.
Oh, there's all sorts of shit I didn't include in that story that you don't want to know about. Hey there, and welcome to Grit, True Stories That Matter. Grit is a weekly podcast about stories, the contemporary personal narrative kind of story, and the people that craft and tell them. Now, some weeks a storyteller will join me here on the podcast, tell one of their stories, and together we will break it down. Other weeks, we feature stories from our myriad events. And other weeks, like this week, we have a conversation with a storyteller about the art and the craft of the personal narrative story. Why, you ask? Well, we want to feature these tellers and their stories, but also to help you, our listeners, craft and tell better, more engaging, more relatable, and more memorable stories. True stories, personal stories, grit stories. This week, I am joined by Jonny Papers, aka John Papernick. I met John in person up in Boston last week, where I met a whole bunch of people in person for the first time. I went up there to tell a couple stories, one at the Moth, and you heard a little part of the very end of our evening there at the top of this episode. And yes, I eked out a win. And also stories from the stage. It was a great experience, mostly because of the people I met. I had a really good time, including me talking with John in his car. This is becoming a bit of a tradition, Sean talking with storytellers in their cars. Check the show notes for upcoming events and or workshops. If you want to help us out, let folks know about the podcast, share it on social media, and you can rate or review it on Apple Podcast if that is where you listen. All right, Jonny Papers, let's dive in.
I had a really good time tonight because, again, it's such a contrast to the literary community.
What's wrong with the literary
I just
community?
never felt like comfortable with them.
I'm with Jonny Papers. Jonny Papers is driving. When I say Jonny Papers, I mean John Papernick. Or Papernick.
Papernick, yeah.
He's from Canada.
He is.
He's been living in Massachusetts for a while.
He's Jewish, don't forget that.
Jewish guy, smart guy, funny guy, nice guy, mostly.
Average-sized.
Slightly below average sized.
No, average-sized.
Because average-sized guys don't
But knows how to use it.
say it.
Knows how to use
They
it.
wouldn't make a point of it. But
It is the point.
yes. Writer, teaches writing, among other things. Dabbled in storytelling for some time, and Jonny Papers, I didn't know him as that at the time, came on my radar right when we locked down. Soon after, I sort of did my thing. I was online a lot. We talked some, and what I want to ask him about is his interest in storytelling, with the understanding that here's what I know about it. He and I believe his wife had a show. When I say show, I mean an online show, sort of an open mic, for a little while. We're thinking about making it a podcast, and I'm not sure if I have that right.
We were going to use the title as the podcast. The podcast was going to be about people's sexual evolution, called Doing It in Public. The idea that we're all ever changing, and where are you today in your sexual journey as to where you were, growing up as a Jewish boy in Long Island.
Sexual can mean a lot of things, right?
It can mean things about sex.
Right. But would that include dating?
It could.
Without sex?
Well, it depends on, yeah, sure.
Of all the things to focus on and center or anchor your show on, why did you guys choose that? By the way, do open marriages ever really work?
Yeah, for true believers, I think. I mean,
Yes.
my novel that you're going to pre-order tonight when you get to my house.
And anyone who's listening will as well. We'll put a link. We'll put a link to the show notes.
It's extremely important that anyone who stays in my house has to buy my book.
Dude, I've got my fucking Venmo account, credit card.
No, it's going to go on the Amazon for that because it's not out till March. We got to pre-order. But here's the deal. So yeah, we wanted to talk about that. We're both big fans of Dan Savage, the Savage Lovecast. I don't know if you don't know it.
Yeah, no, I know that.
And really interesting stuff. And it's interesting. Like our sexuality does evolve over time. It's not a static thing. And I think young people probably look at older people and think like they're just like corpses already. But it's not true. I think the best sexual experiences I ever had was in my 40s. Now I'm 50, so it's all over.
When was your first story? I don't mean, I'm not talking about you and your buddies. Like, personal narrative story, crafted, maybe first stage.
On a stage?
Yeah. When was that?
It was 3 or 4 years ago.
Was that a local thing here in Massachusetts?
Well, my first one, yeah. There's a place called Doyle's, which is closed. It was kind of a Boston institution. They had all these pictures of all the, Kennedys and whatever, in Jamaica Plain. It was this kind of old school kind of bar. And they had a storytelling series there on Sunday nights. And I told my first story there.
Right.
And the first time I told it, my current wife, at the time we weren't married yet, she was going through a divorce, her husband was also into storytelling. And we got picked out of the hat back to back.
Uh-huh.
I told a story, and then he told a story.
Nice.
So it was pretty intense, because we didn't speak then, and we haven't spoken since. He still won't speak to me 6 years later. I'm the stepfather of his 2 girls.
Do you think you were any good that night?
No, I wasn't. I tried to pack too much into 5 minutes.
So what's the lesson to be learned from someone who's hearing this that's newer to this?
Take on, for a 5-minute story?
Yeah, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, take on one story arc, not multiple strands.
100%.
I tried to have multiple strands, because I was like, hey, I'm a smart guy. I can handle it. And
that backfires every fucking time.
I couldn't.
No one can, by the way.
No, going out for a carton of milk is a 5-minute story if you tell it right.
Right.
Mine was about going to Egypt and the 10,000 other things that fucking happen in Egypt. It's like, that's not right. That didn't work.
Takeaway number 1, if you're writing a 5 to 7 minute story, which is often sort of the time limit, one thing. Now, I don't actually think a lot of people, and this is going to sound a little snobby, even really know what that means, but it's a good starting point.
Look, at the time I went out to get milk, etc., and this happened, yada yada.
Yes.
But mine was it was too big. So yeah,
sure.
I've had narrower stories. So the last one I told was the theme was envy, and it was the time when I was a very shy high schooler, didn't know how to talk to girls, and I came home one night on New Year's Eve, which was my birthday, and found this beautiful girl that I had a crush on my neighbor's lawn, which was attached to my lawn, wanting to see him, and how I didn't take her inside on this freezing cold night, and how he took her inside and was with her sexually.
Do you think he was lying?
No, I don't think he was lying at all. I think it was true. He was with a lot of girls back then. He was probably with more girls in high school than I've still been in my whole life. But the irony is that since he's been married, he's had a very difficult relationship with his wife and hasn't been with anyone in years, and often goes years without being with his wife. So
got it. Interesting. Yeah, for sure. And so I think what you're suggesting here, I'm being the annoying host, is that you have to have change.
Yeah.
Something. Even a small little thing. If not, it's kind of like, who cares?
All stories are about change.
Yes.
And oftentimes there's a sense of desire. I desire this. Do I get it or do I not get it?
Yeah, what do you want?
Stories,
What do you want?
The whole story is about what you have to do to get that, or what you tried to do to get that.
People will fight that, though. They'll say, no, you don't have to do that. I will say to that, if you look at any good story, it might not always clobber you over the head and be obvious, but it's there.
Every story is about desire.
Ooh, that's an interesting take.
Yeah, every story is about desire.
Is that right?
I believe, and
why do you think that is? Can we go back to the science or psychology of story?
Well, because since we're on Earth where everyone sucks, and you have conflict, so what is getting in the way of you getting what you desire? And that is where you show what you are made of. That's where you reveal yourself. Conflict is the engine that drives the story.
Now, I agree with you, but what if I were, and I'm sure you've had this because you teach fiction.
Yeah.
What if someone were to say, okay, so what's wrong with a story where I meet a great girl?
Yeah.
And we fall in love, and that's it, and it's told artfully.
Well, then it can work with very precise language. It can work.
Okay.
But it comes
You have a lot more pressure to make it
when
work.
you start taking away things like conflict or character, whatever, then it comes down to the level of the prose.
And it has to be high level.
Yeah, very high level. So
You have to be either very entertaining or very, very interesting. Or
yeah, so
very
not every story needs to have the exact same thing, but most do. But if not, then you've got to really step it up on another level. It's like, wow, this writing is orgasmic. You made a sentence you want to come, you know?
And you're telling the story for the ear, not the eye, and the page.
You need to make yourself sympathetic to the character.
Right, I think it's even harder in some ways to tell that kind of story where you're just about language. Because with a book, I can put it down, I can think about the beauty of the
But how do you do that? Because, again, you're standing there, so you have to make people care about you.
Right.
If you want, if there's something that's making yourself appealing to the listener.
So if somebody were to say, like, it's about a story about me falling in love, I would say, well, there's change there, but you have to find it. So there's a lot of change that happens that people aren't recognizing. So, for example, well, you weren't always in love with her. You wanted to fall in love with her. You did fall in love with her. There is tension.
Yeah.
There is conflict because you don't have yet what you want. Fair?
There's always conflict.
In life.
Whether it's external or external.
Right now, there's conflict between us.
Yeah, because
we're both Jewish.
You're coming to my house, and I'm afraid you're going to try and get up on me.
Or your wife. You really fucked up.
She might be like, "Oh yeah, it's threesome time." It's
Are you still in an open relationship?
No, but no, not currently.
I'm not her type. Don't worry.
I think she'd like to, explore things.
Sure.
No, there's always conflict, whether it's internal or external, and it can be varying degrees of it. It's very calibrated. It could be a lot of very quiet stories with a quiet conflict. There could be things where there's like explosions, literally.
How many times have you been on a stage telling the story?
Maybe 2 dozen.
Okay, that's a lot.
2 dozen times, probably. Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable when I'm doing it. I have a lot of difficulty practicing my stories, so sometimes I'll tell a story for the very first time when I get up on the stage and just piece it together. But then if it works out, I'll get an opportunity to tell it again, and it gets better. And when I told at this story slam, there was 400 people in the audience. There was a finals for a thing. And I'd already told it 2 times previously, and it was the best time I told it was that 3rd time. And it didn't win, which is fine, but it was the best time I'd ever told it.
All right, so boil it down. Other than change, conflict, one story, one arc, one thing, one thread, whatever.
At least for a beginner, at the very least. I mean, sure, there's some varsity level stories that more talented people can pull off multiple strands.
Sure.
But I'm just talking about the kind of a basic story.
Is there anything else you would advise someone who's new to this to think about?
I would say, practice it beforehand to make sure you don't have unnecessary things or you don't repeat yourself.
Yeah.
But I find that a little bit challenging at times.
A lot of process language. You just don't need it. It just adds time. And one thing that people don't think about, almost any good story you see is surprise of some kind.
Yeah. There's
surprise, discovery, surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes stories are deeply personal things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily be comfortable telling, but you are telling. And I think that's kind of the magic of it, And we all of us have countless stories of this. As someone who's been, my first book was published 20 years ago, so I've been a fiction writer for a long time, and there's a much higher entry bar for that, especially with all the gatekeepers in the publishing world.
Yeah.
Even for a published writer, there's a lot of gatekeepers. You're going to get your book published, but nobody wants to review the damn thing. You can't get into this festival, but for storytelling, it's very democratic. Anybody can get up and tell a story. It may not be good the first time, but everyone's got stories to tell.
Yeah.
So what I like about it is the democratic aspect of it, and that you can go to a show and there's people that aren't planning on telling the story that end up getting up and doing it.
And sometimes doing great.
Oftentimes, more often than not, sure.
And even if they're not, they feel good.
They did it.
They dealt with some fear.
Well, doing it. Just getting up and doing it.
Just doing
is
it.
a big deal, I think.
It's a huge deal. Yeah. I think one of the things we learn when we're young, most of us in formal education, is essay writing.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it hard for people to wrap their heads around story, because when we learn it, sort of low-level basic essay is, whatever you put in your fucking introduction, thesis, statement, topic, sentence.
Yeah.
You're essentially saying everything you're going to tell them before you tell them.
Yeah, and then you show the
And you try to give it all away. And in story, we're like, you don't need to give it all away. Just let us to discover it when you discover it. You know what I mean? So you have to unlearn that because we are actually kind of programmed.
Oh, I think a lot of damage is done in high school.
Yeah.
How we use that.
Or like how we learn public speaking is let us know what you're going to say first. So that's fine. And that doesn't cover everything you're actually going to say, but you sort of like, you kind of let us know beforehand what it's about. So we're like tuning out a little bit. And I think with story, you don't need to do that.
No.
The beautiful when you don't do that, we don't actually know what's happening around the bend.
No, it's the closest thing to getting naked up on a stage in front of people because you're bearing your soul.
Yeah.
And you're doing it it's a very intimate thing, the best storytelling. And we live in such a world where people are, hide behind their identity, who they represent themselves to be online, on Facebook and social media. And there's something very open and honest about storytelling because it is non-fiction, 100%. And, just to get up there and just talk to somebody, you make me want to get up and tell a story now. I mean, it's because I really do enjoy it, but, I've been decent at it, but I don't know if I've ever been great at it. And that causes me some pain because I know I have the capability of being great at it, but I don't know if I have the work ethic for this. Because first and foremost, I'm a writer, and I also have my job where I'm a teacher, so I have to put in a lot of work in that. So I don't make a ton of time for my storytelling stuff. So I probably could, if I dedicate myself to it 100%, be as good as I want to be. But I've rarely been as good as I want to be in my storytelling because of the multiple things kind of pulling at me.
Yeah. It takes some time and work, for sure. Most people aren't just great at it and then wing it and crush it. It doesn't work.
No, I knew I had the tools to do it. I do have the tools. But it gets better the more you do it.
How many shows did you produce online when we locked down?
Just 4. I stopped just before the George Floyd protests, and that was probably a good thing because I think at that point people weren't sitting at home on Saturday nights anymore.
So you had like that window.
Yeah, and I didn't want to do something that didn't have enough of an impact. We had like pretty decent audiences, and again, people were very appreciative at first. I mean, we all needed it. We all needed that kind of connection.
Yes.
And after,
I'm not bitter that you didn't ask me because I don't think you knew me.
I didn't ask you?
Maybe you did.
I did ask you. That's how I met you. I thought you did.
Did I say no?
I thought you did one.
Was I good?
I don't know. I don't have all the recordings got erased because
For real?
I didn't know that Zoom erases them after 180 days if I don't save them.
I don't know what happened to me, but a handful of my first shows too on Zoom.
They're all fucking erased. Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing. Do you think there's anything else of value we can talk about for this podcast?
Yeah, most things.
But like a story, we don't want to talk about everything.
We can talk about sex. We can talk about being Jewish. We can talk about.
But this is a story. This is centered on story. This podcast.
All right, being a Jewish person and how being Jewish affects your storytelling. I'm not joking. We all come from that tradition. Every fucking Jew every year goes through the Passover Haggadah, and there's a story.
Not every Jew does that.
Well, yes, every Jew does. Even ones you don't believe in, because it's cool and there's good food.
As always, thanks so much for listening and all of your support, and special thanks to Jonny Papers up in Braintree, Massachusetts. Thank you, John. And of course, your lovely wife, Kim. Check the show notes for upcoming events or workshops, whatever we have got lined up, it is there, including the 99-second Story Slam, Season 5, Slam 3. That is all for episode number 58. Wait for it. Boom.